that's been a generational thing. I mean, if you look up statistics, there have been studies done that say young women and men, they generally vote what their dads do. I grew up with my father being conservative and being a liberal voter because there wasn't, well, he actually used to like the Australian Christian Party, but, you know, I sort of tended to lean that way in my politics because of my father's sort of influence. And unfortunately, that generation, like my dad, late 50s, early 60s, that boomer generation, I don't think that they're quite ready to break free from that. And so we're still getting other generations who are trapped in this never-ending cycle of you can only vote Labor or Liberal. And so I'm curious to see what's going to happen in the next election. Because of COVID, I'm like, is this going to help these alternative political parties, or is this going to just show us that we're so broken as a nation we can't break out of habits? Because culturally speaking, as a nation, Australia has always valued security over freedom. You look at America, for example, they're a beacon of freedom. They fought for their independence, they fought for their freedom on a constitutional level, and even embedded in their Federalist Papers, the men and women that create, well, it was men that created that country did it on the basis of understanding what freedom is and the value of freedom over anything else. Whereas Australia, we were a convict nation. We came over here as part of the monarch, and everything that we were given here was given to us by the government from day dot because we were convicts. This was our second chance. This was a place where we were coming. And so the government became our God. The government became our parents. The government became our security. So it's like a generational curse. We've kind of built the foundations of our entire country on the false narrative that the government will provide everything we need. And so we have bred into our kids and their kids and their kids this need for security or short-term comforts. And I think that we're going to really see in this new election whether we're going to break that curse or whether we're so far gone that if COVID doesn't break us, I just don't know what will break this curse, because I just don't know. I feel like we value security way too much. And what I really try to say and suggest with my political commentary is, and I try to say to people, you might value your short-term comforts now, but you're going to want and need your long-term freedoms. That's something that you need, your basic human rights, and people just don't seem to get it. And, you know, if you choose security over freedom, in the end, you're going to end up with neither of those things. You'll end up with neither security or freedom. And it's a one-way ticket to communism, to socialism. And you only have to look at a history book to see how that ends. And people say, oh, it's never been tested properly. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's a load of nonsense. It has, and it fails every single time, because it fails anything that goes against your basic, fundamental human rights, the rights that was bestowed upon us by the grace of God, by us being made in his image. Anything that goes against those things is a disaster waiting to happen. You can't go against God's inherited purpose and what he's intended for us and expect it to go well. And so this next election will be really interesting, because I'm losing faith that our country is ever going to get out of this mess.
Well, once again, it's like talking to myself. I basically came to the very same conclusions and worries, because as you said, I think it's fundamental, hardwired into the Australian psyche due to our experience and our founding. I mean, as you mentioned, America had a revolution. They fought for what they wanted. They had to establish who they are. It's completely different foundations to the Australian experience of basically, here you go, Australia, here's your system, here's your government, here's your values. Don't worry your pretty little head. Just be good colonialists. And if you're good enough, you may be invited back into polite society again. Yeah. And I think that's still even with us today. I mean, even the whole idea of more of a independent foreign policy, or to become a republic, or any form of autonomy, or sovereignty, we kind of shy away from it. I mean, I remember I was volunteering at a radio station at one point, and something about Brexit was on the TV, and and the people I was surrounded with, they were like, they couldn't compute why would Britain want to leave the European Union. Like the whole idea of independence it seems to be a foreign concept. And I think it's reflected with the whole idea of obeying the government, and obeying the mandates, and obeying the restrictions, and as you said, although it's good to see the protests and good to see the freedom parties kind of get a surge of support, I'm a little bit worried. Is it more of a echo chamber? Is the majority of Australians just going to vote Labor because they hate Morrison? And then, even though Labor is all for the same things the Liberals were, but in fact they're okay with the mandates. They're okay with the camps. They okay. It's you and me and people like us that are out of step. That's why I'm kind of really highly seriously considering maybe eventually just relocating or overseas somewhere. It's hard to do that because this is a global situation. It's happening everywhere. So where do you go? Maybe Florida and maybe Texas. But other than that, it's not like it used to be, like this Cold War where it was clearly defined two different systems, and you can go to America, for example, or the West. Now it's everywhere. It's in Europe, it's in Australia, it's in America, it's in Britain, it's everywhere. Although I have to say, Australia and Canada seems to be more draconian than even Britain. I mean, for example, Britain has got rid of all the restrictions, and Australia and Canada, I think Canada kind of lifted some of them too now. But Australia is still holding on. It still doesn't want to let go of those restrictions. I mean, for example, the mandates for work is still on. That's affected me personally. I haven't worked since October. I don't know how many jobs I was denied, or was basically said, "Oh, we can't go any further with your application." As soon as I heard that I wasn't vaxxed. I mean, so I'm looking at, unless things change with the next election, we can get a foothold into the government, and maybe we can change some things. I'm seriously have to consider going somewhere else, because I can't waste another year just sitting around the house. Hopefully maybe getting lucky and finding a job that doesn't really want the mandates. Yeah, it's worrying because, like I said, are the majority of Australians okay with it, and I'm the one that's out of place? I don't know.
I think I actually do think there's almost like there's three types of Australians. One, you've got the group of Australians who are more than happy to go along with the mandates, the lockdowns. They're basically the govern me harder daddy types.
Yeah.
And they're all for the Jane Caro, however you pronounce the name, those sorts of types of Australians who have like the blue teardrop in their bio, all for climate change. You've got those type of Australians who I don't think are the majority, but I think they're on. There's a decent number of them, and then you've got the types of Australians like you and I who are viewed as the extreme, who are completely against government involvement in our personal health in terms of like mandating vaccines and things. You've got people who are like us, who are very pro-freedom, anti-government. You've got that. And then I think the bulk of Australians which would be the majority, are the types who probably don't agree with the mandates, probably don't agree with the lockdowns, but will just go along with it because they're either not ready to stand and have to give up their short-term comforts, or they just don't care enough and they just want to just do what they're being told is the right thing. And so what we have to do, I think, those of us in our sort of spectrum who are very much awake to the agenda, our job is to lead the majority to water and hope and pray to God that they take a drink. Because we can lead a horse to water, but we can't force them to drink. I don't think us kicking and screaming and protesting is really going to make any difference to that majority of Australians who just don't really know. They're kind of on the fence. I think the only benefit that comes from protesting is the community feeling, and it makes people feel less alone. If people feel like they're standing alone in a political thought or a political movement, they're not going to be as loud. Whereas if people feel like they're not alone, there is that mob mentality feel. Not all mob mentalities are bad. There is very bad mob mentality, but there's also a positive mob mentality. And there is that, I guess, mentality of a crowd and what can come from a crowd. And there's actually been psychological reports that have been made. There was a Frenchman in the 1800s who actually wrote about it. And he wrote about the psychology of a crowd. And he spoke about how people in a crowd are more likely to do things that they wouldn't do if they were on their own. If they were one person at a shopping center and they saw something and they were by themselves, they might not step in and do something. But if there's people around them who are like-minded to them, they're more likely to step in and do something. And this particular guy in the 1800s who wrote about the psychology of the crowd goes into that in great detail. So there is benefit to protests. There is benefit to not feeling alone, but it certainly is not likely to make any difference in the short term. The protests, the crowds, I believe personally, is more of a long-term thing. Getting more people to feel not alone, getting more people to be confident to stand up for what is right, getting more people to feel like they have a community around them who will support them. If you know, and that's if there's a benefit from that. But in terms of short-term politics, we really need more of a grassroots type movement where we somehow lead that majority of quiet Australians to that watering hole. And then we need to stand around the watering hole and try and convince them to take a drink. That's all we can really do on the political front. But even more so to any of this, the only real thing and hope that Australians have, if we our homes, and I've said this
Sorry, could you repeat that, please? You faded out a bit.
Sorry, yeah. The only real hope we have, and this isn't something that's going to happen overnight, this is a real long-term thing. The only real hope we have for Australians is what we do within the four walls of our own home. So we have a responsibility as Australians who are in our sort of category, that third category, that more extreme, they would probably like to label us, but that awake to the truth agenda people. Our job is to protect the four walls of our homes at all costs. Our job is to raise the next generation in the truth. Our job is to raise the next generation to understand how to use logic and reason and objectivity and debate. We need to raise the next kids to understand that the government are not our gods. We need the next generation to understand that the government are not mum and dad, because while ever we treat them like mum and dad, they're going to treat us like their children. And we need to break that generational thing in the next kids. And it's going to be a slow burn doing this, but it's the only real hope we have. And with a majority, can make a tangible difference. Until then, we've got to do the hard work, majority.